your federal government has borrowed, by the end of this year, will have borrowed $45,000. $100,000 per American family. But it gets worse. Over the next decade, they project that's going to go up to $26 trillion, nearly doubling our nation's debt. Now, we got Lauren Scott and a bunch of really smart economists here. I'm not an economist, but I do know this. You can't spend more than you take in year after year. You can't keep printing money. You can't keep going to China and borrowing money. I know if we keep down this path, what we're going to end up doing is raising our interest rates, our inflationary rates. We'll see the value of the dollar go down. You know, it's pretty simple. You can't spend more than you take in. It really comes down to that. It's really simple. What they're doing in Washington right now is they're spending our children's and our grandchildren's money. Make no mistake about it. Every generation of Americans, including us, has inherited more opportunities from our predecessors than they themselves had. I don't think we want to go down in history as being the first generation of Americans that leaves fewer opportunities for our children and grandchildren. Yet that's exactly what they're doing in Washington, D.C. as we speak. Now, let me talk about three specific issues I saw in Washington before I turn my attention to here in Louisiana that illustrate what I think is so broken about the Washington way. Two of these impact our industry directly. The third impacts every single person in this room, every single person in this country. The first, they proposed over $36 billion in new taxes on this industry. Now, again, I'm not a great economist, but it seems to me if you want more of an activity, don't tax it. If you want to discourage an activity, tax it. Make no mistake about it, tens of billions of dollars of new taxes on domestic energy production will have only this impact. It will send those jobs overseas. It'll make us even more dependent on foreign sources of energy. Every time a politician gets up and says they're angry about the high cost of energy, ask them then, why in the world would they want to raise taxes on that same energy? Why in the world would they want to make it more difficult for us to produce energy right here at home for our industry and for our manufacturing jobs? But the second thing, it doesn't stop there. Not only is it higher taxes, which is one of the worst things you could do during a time of great economic challenges, secondly, you've got the EPA unilaterally proposing some of the most sweeping regulations that would impact almost every industry, every manufacturer across this entire country. Talking about the greenhouse emissions, I've got several of my cabinet secretaries here. I know Scott Angel from DNR and others, along with myself, wrote letters to the President, to the cabinet secretaries, sharing our concerns about this rulemaking process. Now, let me give you a concrete example of what this would do if these rules were to go into play with no input from Congress, no oversight from an elected branch of government, the other elected branch from government, at a time that these rules would have such a dramatic impact on our economy. Just look at the example of Nucor. Nucor is proposing to spend between $2 and $4 billion to create one of the country's most modern steel mills. They've already spent tens of millions of dollars, over $50 million, buying property in St. James Parish. This would end up creating over 1,250 jobs across 3 phases, average pay over $75,000. I've talked to the CEO of Nucor several times. He's basically told me this. He said they will either build in St. James Parish, Louisiana, or they will build in Brazil. They've already raised the money. They did that before the recession started, before the credit crunch hit, so they've got the money to build. Now, one of their key considerations, one of their top concerns, are these unilateral EPA regulations. Somebody is going to have to educate me how sending these good-paying jobs over to Brazil helps the environment. Last time I checked, our environmental rules were tougher in America than they were overseas. So how in the world does it help the environment to send these jobs to Brazil, to China, to other countries around the world through these unilateral regulations? And if that wasn't enough, the third example of the Washington way. Maybe you saw the historic vote on Sunday. Only in Washington, D.C., where they say we've got record deficits, so let's spend another $1 trillion. Only in Washington, D.C., where they say health care is too expensive, so let's raise taxes on health insurance, health drugs, health products to make it cheaper. And again, somebody's going to have to tell me how raising taxes makes it cheaper. Only in Washington, where they say our states are facing huge budget pressures, so let's shift an unfunded mandate to those same states. Here in Louisiana, over $340, $360 million a year in new costs for our state once this is fully phased in. Over 300,000 new enrollees in our Medicaid program at a time we're already facing tremendous budget pressures. Only in Washington, where they want to cut $500 billion out of the Medicare program that takes care of our seniors, including $200 million out of the Medicare Advantage program that's so popular here in Louisiana. Only in Washington, where they want to raise taxes by over $500 billion during one of the nation's worst recessions. And the list goes on and on and on about what's wrong with this health care bill. And what's galling to me is there was such an opportunity, a missed opportunity to pursue bipartisan reforms to actually lower the cost of health care. We could have made insurance portable across state lines and across jobs. We could have done something about frivolous lawsuits. We could have done something about pre-existing conditions. We could have done something to provide working Americans with refundable, advanceable tax credits. We could have invested in preventative and primary care. Numerous times I laid out bipartisan principles, and others did as well. We could have actually addressed the rising cost of health care. 2,000-page bill, $1 trillion in new spending, and you know what? Premiums are still going to go up. I do want to talk about Louisiana. I will say I know we're joined by a number of state legislators and Chris John, who actually served in Congress before I got up there. I do have to share with you just very quickly. I know this is a very specific example. I remember getting into a debate with some of my colleagues about expanding offshore production, where I can't find another industrialized country, not in Europe, not elsewhere, that doesn't allow the kind of offshore production that we tend to ban right here in America. And I remember getting into a debate with one of my colleagues about why this would be good for energy independence, why it would be good for our economy, and even good for the environment when done properly. Well, you know, at one point I believe we should be drilling for oil and gas. By the way, I also believe we should be building nuclear plants and doing solar and wind and clean coal. I think we need to be doing all of it. And I think it's the only way we'll be energy independent. I think it's the only way we can drive an economy forward right here that keeps good-paying manufacturing jobs here. At one point in the debate, we didn't have the votes. I'll be honest. We didn't have the votes to do oil and gas production. So one of my colleagues from Pennsylvania offered a bill to say, let's just do natural gas production offshore. All right, if we can't do oil, now again, I believe in doing it both, but he said, let's just do natural gas production offshore. Literally, one of my colleagues came to me and said, we can't do that. We may have a spill on our beaches in our state. So now, not only do members of Congress probably not read the Constitution, they don't take high school chemistry or physics either. I said, you do know natural gas is a gas, right? You listen to the name. I could talk to you all day about what's wrong with Washington and the Washington way, but I want to talk about the Louisiana way. We're doing something different in Louisiana. Look, as governor, I can't go to China and borrow money. I don't get to print my own money, and I wouldn't do that even if I could. We made a different decision in Louisiana. I have said as long as I'm your governor, if you don't hear anything else about the Louisiana way, this is what I want you to hear. As long as I'm your governor, we're not raising taxes in the state of Louisiana. That would be the worst thing we could do in this economy. I want to talk about the Louisiana way and how we go forward in our state. You know, why is that so important that we not raise taxes? It's all about jobs, jobs, jobs. Remember, I told you that's the top priority facing our state. The reality is this: during a tough economic time, government's got one fundamental decision to make. Do we absorb this burden and make the tough choices in government, or do we shift this burden to our families and businesses? We've made the decision we cannot and will not impose this burden on you, the people that actually create the jobs in our state and our country. Make no mistake about it, government doesn't create jobs, government doesn't create wealth. And so it is so important we make it as easy as possible for our businesses to expand, thrive, and invest in our state.